The Northrop F-5. Fast, lightweight and manoeuvrable, able to accurately deliver ordnance on target, yet low cost and easy to maintain. So why then did nobody want it? In 1954, Northrop embarked on a tour of Europe and Asia to better understand what Allied nations were looking for in a new fighter aircraft. What they found was that affordability and ease of maintenance were top priorities, with the aircraft needing to perform both air-to-air and air-to-ground missions. But these requirements contrasted sharply with fighters that the US was developing at the time, such as the F-4 Phantom II, which was going to be large, complex, and expensive to purchase and operate. In response, Northrop launched the N-156 lightweight fighter program in 1955, aiming to strike a balance between affordability and performance to meet the needs of Allied air forces worldwide. Leading the design effort was Northrop's Vice President of Engineering, Edgar Schmude. If you haven't heard of him before, you'll have definitely heard of some of the aircraft on his CV. Before Northrop, Schmude had worked for North American Aviation, contributing significantly to the P-51 Mustang, the F-86 Sabre, and the F-100 Super Sabre, to name but a few. It's fair to say then that the man knew a thing or two about designing aircraft. By mid-1955, Northrop had finalised two design variants, the two-seater N-156T and the single-seater N-156F. Northrop's design philosophy focused on creating a low-cost, lightweight, simple and reliable jet with exceptional manoeuvrability. Powered by two General Electric J85 engines, the aircraft boasted an impressive thrust-to-weight ratio, offering high performance at an affordable acquisition and lifecycle cost. Northrop pitched the new fighter to both the US Navy and Air Force. Unfortunately, the Navy showed no interest. But the Air Force, although initially uninterested in the single-seater variant, began considering a replacement for its aging jet trainer, the T-33 Shooting Star, and saw potential in the dual-seater N-156. In late 1955, the USAF officially published its requirements for a new trainer, and by June 1956, they determined that Northrop's jet met those needs. The aircraft was renamed the T38 Talon and entered service in 1961. A total of 1,189 units were produced, and T-38s are still in service today, making it the longest-serving trainer ever produced, a true testament to the forward-thinking design principles of Northrop's engineers. Despite no interest from the US military, Northrop continued development of its single-seater N-156. The Mutual Assistance Program was a US military aid initiative established in the late 1940s and expanded during the 1950s as part of Cold War efforts to strengthen Allied nations against the Soviet Union. It provided military equipment, training, and logistical support to friendly governments, particularly in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Since the end of the Second World War, the US had focused on producing large, expensive, sophisticated fighters at the cutting edge of technology. But to meet the demands of the Mutual Assistance Program, a fighter that was not only cheaper to procure but also operate was needed. Towards the end of 1958, the USAF again looked at the N-156 as a potential way to fulfill this need. 3 prototypes, known as the Freedom Fighters, were ordered. Flight testing would take place at Edwards Air Force Base, with the first flight completed on the 30th of July 1959. On its first flight, despite being fitted with non-afterburning engines, serial number 594987 went supersonic. Looking at the sleek aerodynamic shape of the F-5, it's easy to see why. As the old aviation saying goes, if it looks good, it'll fly good. Soon, all 3 prototypes were fitted with afterburning engines, and testing continued at Edwards Air Force Base. They fired infrared-guided Sidewinder missiles, 2.75-inch rockets from wing-mounted pods, and dropped a range of bombs. Having proved itself capable in both air-to-air and air-to-ground operations, the Freedom Fighter was finally selected in 1962 as the fighter to be supplied under the Mutual Assistance Program. Northrop's jet was renamed the F-5A Freedom Fighter and a first order was placed. They also secured orders for the dual-seat variant, the F-5B. It would serve as a trainer but could also take on light combat roles. Norway also placed an order in 1964 for 64 aircraft, becoming the first Allied nation to adopt the F-5. It seemed then that Northrop's hard work was finally beginning to pay off. However, other Allied air forces weren't so sure. They were hesitant to adopt the F-5, as the USAF didn't operate it in frontline service. The thinking was, if they don't want it, why should we? Without this operational endorsement, many countries viewed other aircraft already in use by the USAF as a safer investment, knowing there would be continued US support and spare parts availability. European countries within NATO favoured more technologically advanced aircraft, particularly the F-104 Starfighter. This was partly thanks to an intense international sales effort known as the Deal of the Century, which aimed to sell the F-104 to Allied nations. But the programme became mired in controversy after it came to light that Lockheed executives were allegedly offering bribes to government officials during negotiations to secure sales of the aircraft. Finally, there were training and doctrine concerns. Many nations had structured their air forces around aircraft used by the USAF, and adopting a fighter not in American service might require changes to doctrine, training and logistics. In order to address these concerns, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara wanted to send the F-5A for a combat evaluation in South Vietnam. The US was keen to equip the Republic of Vietnam Air Force with a new jet. Arming the VNAF with a more capable fighter would greatly increase their warfighting ability. The F-5 offered an affordable way to modernise and streamline an air force that was made up of a mix of ageing aircraft. New equipment with improved capabilities would also provide a much-needed boost in morale. But before heading into combat on the other side of the world, tests would first need to be conducted on home soil under much safer and controlled conditions. These tests, known as Project Sparrowhawk, would be carried out at the USAF Tactical Air Warfare Center at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida. To really see what the F-5 could do, it would be pitted against some of the best fighters of the time: the F-4 Phantom II, F-100 Super Sabre and the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk. At the end of this initial evaluation, the F-5 had demonstrated that it could hold its own in all aspects against more sophisticated and expensive aircraft, only lacking behind in range and loiter time. It was during this testing that the idea of acquiring F-5s for the VNAF under the Mutual Assistance Programme was put forth. On the 22nd of July 1965, the 4,503rd Tactical Fighter Squadron was formed at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona, and in October of that year they were assigned 12 F-5As. They were to perform operational testing as well as train pilots and maintenance crews on the new jet. This next phase of the combat evaluation was called Skoshi Tiger. To further prepare for combat operations, the 12 jets were subject to several modifications by Northrop. Firstly, they added a non-retractable air-to-air refueling probe, giving them the range to complete the trip to Southeast Asia. They added armour plating around the cockpit and engines. The gun sight was upgraded, giving pilots visual cues for computed lead. Upgraded avionics and a more advanced gyroscopic system improved stability, allowing for more accurate delivery of ordnance. Finally, pylons for external stores were now jettisonable, increasing flexibility and survivability. This new variant was designated the F-5C. In just 88 days since its formation, the 4,503rd Tactical Fighter Squadron was deemed combat ready, and on the 22nd of October 1965, they departed Williams Air Force Base bound for Bien Hoa Air Base in South Vietnam. The flight was to be broken down into shorter legs. The first stop was Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. En route, the F-5s had to air-to-air refuel 8 times. From Hickam, they flew to Andersen Air Force Base on the island of Guam, part of the Marianas Islands, the 8-hour flight requiring 5 mid-air refuels. After some maintenance and inspections, they set off from Guam for Clark Air Base in the Philippines, and then, finally, onto Bien Hoa Air Base in South Vietnam. The trip had taken 4 days to complete and covered 8,279 nautical miles. They flew for a total of 19 hours and had to refuel mid-air 16 times. After completing what must have been a tediously long, exhausting and cramped journey, there would be little time for rest. Having arrived only 5 hours earlier, 2 of the jets took off for their first combat mission. They were headed to War Zone D, an area in South Vietnam which surrounded the Dong Nai River, located about 10 kilometers north of Bien Hoa Air Base. They were to engage a Viet Cong battalion that had been reported in the area. Armed with 4 500-pound bombs each and 20mm cannon, they began their attack. By the time they had finished, they had destroyed almost the entire battalion. The F-5's combat debut had been a decisive success. The Skoshi Tiger combat evaluation program would be split into 3 phases, each intended to test the F-5 in different ways. The evaluators were looking to assess 4 key areas: maintainability, survivability, maneuverability, and accuracy of weapon delivery. Throughout these phases, the F-5 would be directly compared in this criteria against the F-100s of the 12th Tactical Fighter Wing and the F-104s of the 435th Tactical Fighter Squadron. The F-104 comparison would be dropped when they left Vietnam in November 1965, being replaced shortly after in December by the new F-4C Phantom II, a variant that was developed specifically for the Air Force. Phase 1 would assess the F-5's ability to work alongside forward air and ground controllers to accurately deliver ordnance on target. Phase 2 would add combat air patrols to its mission set, intercepting and destroying hostile aircraft. Phase 3 would be a combat sortie generation test, with 20 to 30 sorties expected to be flown every day. And so Phase 1 began, and would last for 66 days. Within that time, the 12 Skoshi Tigers dropped over 3 million pounds of bombs on targets, with accuracy reported as excellent. 1,500 sorties were flown during this first phase, which averaged to 2 sorties per day per aircraft. A few F-5s did take damage from ground fire, and sadly, 1 jet was lost. They were most likely to be hit when pulling up after an attack run, but those that sustained damage were all repaired overnight and ready for combat the next day. The mechanics quickly grew to love the F-5. Its simplicity and well thought out design made it easy to work on. Pilots too loved flying it. It was fast, nimble, and its small size made it harder for the enemy to spot. At the end of Phase 1, the F-5 had performed well and had held its own in comparison with the F-100, F-104 and F-4C. But that's not to say there was no room for improvement. Pilots would have liked more range, longer loiter time and the ability to carry more ordnance. The M39 cannons weren't quite as reliable as hoped either. They had also identified a problem with gases generated from the cannon when it was fired being ingested into the engine, causing reduced performance, flameouts and engine damage. Northrop engineers would go on to solve this problem by adding gun gas deflectors, which would redirect the M39 gun gas away from the engine. When the pilot pulled the trigger to fire the cannon, the deflectors would automatically pop up and then retract as needed. In January of 1966, Phase 2 of the evaluation began. The Skoshi Tigers relocated to Da Nang Air Base in South Vietnam. For this phase, which included a greater focus on combat air patrols, they would carry 2 AIM-9B IR-guided Sidewinder missiles, as well as a full load of 20mm for the M39. Unfortunately though, there would be no opportunity for air-to-air combat due to a lack of enemy fighters to engage. For the final phase, the high generation sortie test, only 6 aircraft would be used. It would take place over a 3-week period, with the aim being for each jet to fly 4 to 5 sorties a day. But once again, the F-5 proved more than capable. Returning from a sortie, it took maintenance technicians just 20 minutes to service, rearm and refuel each jet. Over the 3 weeks, the 6 aircraft had a 100% ready rate. Although this phase was due to end on the 20th of February, the F-5s were redeployed back to Da Nang to complete the attack testing which had been cut short during Phase 2. They would face yet more delays due to persistent bad weather over North Vietnam, but finally, on the last day of February, they resumed operations. For an entire week, they flew bombing missions over North Vietnam as well as combat air patrol, and on the 8th of March, they all returned safely back to Bien Hoa Air Base. A few days later, the Skoshi Tiger combat evaluation program officially concluded, with evaluators declaring it a complete success. Over the 150 combat days, the squadron flew 2,664 combat sorties and dropped £6 million of ordnance accurately on various targets. Remarkably, this was achieved with just 10 maintenance man-hours per flight hour, far more efficient than the F-4C's 30 to 40 hours or the F-100's 50 to even 100 hours per flight hour. The evaluation validated not only the aircraft's performance as a weapons platform, but also its cost-effective maintenance, which could be handled by a small team of technicians. Despite 1 aircraft being lost and 8 others damaged by 30mm anti-aircraft fire, all damaged aircraft were repaired overnight and made combat ready the following day. Northrop's forward-thinking design had clearly produced an impressive fighter, proving that low cost didn't have to mean sacrificing performance. With the F-5's capabilities no longer in doubt, it went on to be adopted by numerous air forces worldwide and even remained in service today. Feedback from the Skoshi Tiger program was taken seriously by Northrop, leading to further refinements that culminated in the F-5E Tiger II, a name chosen as a tribute to the Skoshi Tiger program that had cemented the aircraft's reputation. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing, as it would really help me grow the channel.